Elon Musk just pulled off the biggest wealth heist in modern history. Not from a bank, not from a government, from Tesla shareholders. If you own a single share of Tesla, this story hits close to home, because you're the one being robbed. This isn't about rockets. It's not about artificial intelligence. It's about the oldest story in capitalism, the founder, who uses public trust to build a private empire, then leaves the public holding empty promises while he controls the real future. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the $1.5 trillion SpaceX XAI merger rewrites the rules of who gets to profit from the next industrial revolution and why Tesla shareholders are funding their own displacement. So does this just remain in theory? No. Let's look at the architecture. To understand what just happened, you need to understand the architecture of Musk's empire, not the public-facing version with the meme tweets and the product launches. The real structure. The private structure. SpaceX is not a public company. Neither is XAI. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Public companies have disclosure requirements, shareholder votes, independent boards with actual power. Private companies have one stakeholder who matters, one person who controls the voting shares, one person who decides where the capital flows, which projects live, which projects die. Musk owns roughly 42% of SpaceX. He controls approximately 79% of the voting shares. This means he can single-handedly approve any merger, any acquisition, any strategic pivot. No board vote can override him. No shareholder coalition can outvote him. XAI was similarly structured. Musk as majority owner. A small circle of insiders, funding rounds valued the company at $20 billion before this merger. In private markets, there are no quarterly earnings calls, no SEC disclosures, no activist investors demanding accountability. Just one person deciding where billions flow. These aren't democracies. They're extensions of one person's will. That will has just been focused with terrifying precision on a single objective: building artificial intelligence infrastructure in orbit. If everything up to this point seems like a normal merger, the real part is coming now. The mechanism is almost elegant in its simplicity. SpaceX has Starlink over 9,400 satellites, already circling Earth, with plans to launch up to 1 million more. This isn't just a constellation. It's a communications layer that spans the entire planet, providing low-latency internet to every corner of Earth. And soon, it will provide the data links for something far more ambitious. XAI has Colossus, currently the largest AI training supercomputer on the planet, housed in Memphis, Tennessee, with over 200,000 GPUs, running at full capacity. To put that in perspective, that's more raw computing power than most nations possess. The merger combines these assets. Starlink provides the data transmission backbone. Colossus provides the processing intelligence. Together, they create something no terrestrial competitor can replicate. Together, they form the foundation for something that sounds like science fiction, but is already in active development: space-based data centers. Here's what that actually means in plain English. Imagine taking a 50-story office building, packed with servers the kind Google or Amazon has thousands of, and launching it into orbit. Except in space, you don't pay for electricity. You don't fight with regulators over cooling towers. You don't compete for power grid access. The sun provides unlimited energy. The vacuum of space provides unlimited cooling. It's like having a factory that runs for free forever, while your competitors back on Earth struggle with utility bills and environmental permits. To put this in perspective, a single orbital data center could generate enough computing power to train AI models that would take years to develop on Earth, completing them in months. The economic advantage isn't just significant, it's potentially insurmountable. Once these systems are operational, Earth-bound data centers might look as outdated as dial-up internet does today. The AI energy crisis that has utilities scrambling to build new power plants, that has regulators investigating XAI's illegal methane turbine installations in Tennessee. This crisis doesn't exist in space. Or rather, Musk has decided it doesn't need to exist for him. So where does that leave Tesla? The answer will shock you. Tesla has staked its entire future on artificial intelligence, full self-driving, the Optimus humanoid robot, the robo-taxi network that Musk promised would be operational by the end of 2024. Then 2025, now maybe 2026 if you're feeling optimistic. These aren't side projects. They're the valuation thesis. They're why Tesla trades at 200 times earnings, while traditional automakers trade at 8. Investors aren't buying a car company. They're buying an AI company that happens to make cars. But here's the uncomfortable truth that the merger makes unavoidable. Tesla's AI infrastructure is chained to the grid. Tesla's supercomputer, Dojo, sits in Austin, mired in regulatory challenges, its training clusters dependent on the overburdened Texas electrical grid. Meanwhile, the newly merged SpaceX XAI entity is building an escape hatch from all those limits. Here's a simple way to understand the difference. Tesla's Dojo is like a factory running on a local power grid that everyone shares. When demand peaks, your electricity gets rationed. SpaceX XAI's orbital infrastructure is like having your own private nuclear power plant that never runs out of fuel, never faces blackouts, and never has to negotiate with regulators. Same goal building AI, completely different playing fields. The implications extend far beyond just faster training times. AI models trained in orbit could achieve capabilities that Earthbound systems simply cannot replicate due to power and cooling constraints. We're talking about models that could solve scientific problems, design new materials, or optimize complex systems in ways impossible with current ground-based infrastructure. The gap between orbital and Earthbound AI isn't just quantitative, it's qualitative. Musk calls this solving the AI energy crisis. And in a narrow sense, that's accurate. Orbital data centers solve the energy constraint by leaving Earth behind. By creating a two-tier system where the most powerful computing happens above the atmosphere, accessible only to those who can afford the ride up. The rest of us Tesla shareholders, ordinary consumers, were left with Earthbound systems. The power grids, the cooling requirements, the regulatory oversight that makes things slower but theoretically fairer. Think of it like two generals fighting the same war. One has access to an unlimited supply line that bypasses enemy territory entirely. The other is still fighting through contested ground, losing supplies to every skirmish, every border checkpoint, every resource constraint. That's the position Tesla now occupies. And in artificial intelligence, computational resources aren't just an advantage. They're the advantage. The company with the most training capacity wins. Full stop. But wait, there's something buried in the merger. Documents that changes everything. The merger documentation contains a single sentence that should have sent Tesla's stock into freefall. Buried in a section about resource allocation priorities, the filing notes the combined entity will pursue strategic synergies with affiliated companies, where such synergies advance the mission of developing artificial general intelligence. Affiliated companies, that's the language they used. Not Tesla, not subsidiaries. The phrasing matters. It creates options, flexibility, a mechanism to absorb talent, technology, capital from Tesla and do so under the banner of strategic synergies that benefit the larger mission. So what does this actually mean in practice? Let's follow the money. In January 2026, just weeks before the merger announcement, Tesla disclosed in its quarterly earnings report that it had invested $2 billion in XAI. The official explanation was efficiency. Tesla executives claimed the company would save money by investing in XAI, rather than building redundant AI infrastructure. They said it would accelerate development. The market initially treated this as good news, a prudent allocation of capital, a smart partnership between aligned entities. But follow the money. Really follow it. That $2 billion didn't stay in XAI's bank account collecting interest. It went to expanding the Colossus supercomputer. It went to hiring AI researchers at salaries that Tesla couldn't match. It went to infrastructure that post-merger is now owned by SpaceX. Tesla invested $2 billion in what has become an asset of a private company controlled entirely by Musk. To understand the scale of this transfer, consider what $2 billion could have built. A second Dojo supercomputer, a dedicated renewable energy facility, a research campus that might have attracted talent instead of losing it. Instead, that capital sits on the balance sheet of a private entity. Musk controls it absolutely, available to him, not to the Tesla shareholders who provided it. Here's the kicker: Tesla doesn't get preferred access to that infrastructure. It doesn't get guaranteed computing allocation. It doesn't get board representation in the merged entity. What it gets is the same thing every other XAI customer gets: the right to purchase services at market rates from a supplier that now has every incentive to prioritize its own projects over Tesla's needs. And the talent exodus tells an even clearer story. In the 12 months preceding the merger, over 400 AI engineers left Tesla for either XAI or direct positions at SpaceX's AI division. 400? That's not attrition. That's evacuation. And these aren't junior developers updating website code. These are the researchers who built Tesla's neural networks, who trained the computer vision systems, who were supposedly working on the next generation of full self-driving. The knowledge transfer is staggering. These engineers didn't just bring their individual expertise, they brought Tesla's internal AI secrets, years of proprietary research, optimization techniques that gave Tesla its edge. Musk has a standard response when questioned about this talent drain. He claims the transfers represent natural movement within the ecosystem, and that talent follows interesting problems, which is true as far as it goes. But it omits the crucial detail that Musk personally controls. Which problems get defined as interesting? It omits the fact that XAI was offering Tesla engineers, signing bonuses of up to $2 million, funded by investment rounds that Musk personally orchestrated. In competitive technology markets, this kind of intellectual property migration would typically trigger aggressive legal action. At Tesla, it proceeded with what outside observers described as suspicious cooperation. We're not talking about a few disgruntled employees seeking better opportunities. This is systematic, organized, and most importantly, one-directional. Nobody's moving from XAI to Tesla. The flow only goes one way from the public company, with accountability and disclosure requirements to the private company with neither. Human resources professionals call this talent, poaching when it happens between competitors. They call it organizational development when it's internal mobility. But when the same person controls both the source and destination of talent migration, and when that migration systematically benefits one entity over another, it becomes something else entirely: structural extraction of intellectual capital, from entities with dispersed ownership to entities with concentrated control. Here's where we need to pause and understand why this is happening. Because Tesla's board of directors is not independent. Not really. Musk's brother sits on it. Close associates sit on it. The chair, Robin Denholm, has been described by institutional investors as notoriously deferential to Musk's strategic decisions when shareholder proposals have demanded greater oversight of related party transactions, the technical term for deals between Musk's various companies. Those proposals have been voted down, not because they lacked merit, but because Musk controls enough voting shares to defeat any challenge to his authority. This isn't a bug in Tesla's governance. It's the feature that makes the entire extraction mechanism possible. An independent board might have questioned that investment, might have demanded board representation in the merged entity, might have challenged the talent exodus. Instead, the board provides formal approvals that give legal cover to transactions, systematically disadvantaging Tesla shareholders. Now we need to examine what this merger actually creates, not just in business terms, in power terms. The combined SpaceX XAI entity controls 3 critical technologies: space launch, global internet connectivity, and artificial intelligence training. No other company in history has held all 3. Not Google, not Amazon, not the old AT&T monopoly. This is genuinely unprecedented concentration. Start with launch. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket has become the dominant launch vehicle for the United States, and increasingly for the world. In 2025, SpaceX conducted 134 orbital launches. That's more than every other country combined except China. The company has effectively cornered the market for getting things into space, and competitors are years, possibly decades behind. Blue Origin, despite Jeff Bezos's billions, has struggled to achieve consistent orbital capability. United Launch Alliance, the traditional aerospace partnership between Boeing and Lockheed Martin, can't match SpaceX's cost structure or launch frequency. China's space program is formidable, but largely restricted to domestic and geopolitical ally launches. For Western companies and most of the global market, SpaceX has become the only viable option for reaching orbit. That launch dominance feeds directly into the second pillar, Starlink. Every satellite in the constellation had to reach orbit somehow. SpaceX used its own rockets, launched at internal cost, rather than market rates, to build a network, providing internet to over 4 million subscribers worldwide. Starlink isn't just a consumer product. It's infrastructure. The U.S. military relies on it. Ukraine's defense against Russian invasion has depended on it. The system has become too big to fail and too integrated to replace quickly. This is where we need to pause and recognize what we're looking at. A self-reinforcing system. SpaceX launches satellites cheaply because it owns the rockets. Starlink provides data links that orbital AI facilities need. The AI infrastructure, once operational, optimizes every aspect of the system that built it. Now add the third pillar, AI training capacity. Colossus operates over 200,000 GPUs. Post-merger plans call for 1 million GPUs by 2027, including orbital data centers. Satellites with AI processing hardware communicating via Starlink's laser links, creating a distributed network spanning the planet. This is where the story takes a darker turn. In the weeks following the merger announcement, regulatory filings from both the FCC and the FAA revealed something that SpaceX XAI had not publicly disclosed. The companies had applications submitted them months before the merger, in fact, for orbital launches of what they termed experimental computing platforms. The technical specifications were buried in engineering documents, written in the deliberately opaque language that aerospace companies use to obscure capabilities from competitors. But researchers at MIT's Media Lab decoded the filings. Those experimental computing platforms aren't prototypes. They're production hardware, AI training clusters designed to operate in low Earth orbit, powered by solar arrays with surface areas measured in square kilometers. The first launches are scheduled for late 2026. The full constellation, over 10,000 orbital AI processing nodes, is planned for completion by 2029. Let that sink in. While Tesla struggles to secure electricity for its Austin supercomputer fighting, local utilities, dealing with protests, constrained by the power grid, SpaceX XAI is building an alternative infrastructure that bypasses all those limits. Unlimited solar power, unlimited cooling via radiation into space, unlimited scalability, limited only by launch capacity, which SpaceX also controls. This isn't competition, it's transcendence. This isn't competition, it's transcendence. It's one part of Musk's empire, solving problems that another part is still struggling with, using resources that the struggling part helped fund but doesn't control. Tesla has two core AI bets: full self-driving, which has been 2 years away since 2014, and Optimus, the humanoid robot that Musk claims will revolutionize labor markets. Both require enormous computational resources to train. Both are competing for those resources against projects that Musk now controls more directly through SpaceX XAI. Here's where we need to understand the math. Training a state-of-the-art autonomous driving model currently requires approximately 50,000 GPU hours for each major iteration. But what exactly is a GPU hour? Think of it as computing. Fuel, a measurement of how much processing power you need and for how long. Like measuring a road trip in gallons of gas, the more GPU hours you have, the more powerful AI models you can train. Training a humanoid robot to perform general tasks would require orders of magnitude, more GPU hours than autonomous driving. Every AI researcher knows that the company with the most training capacity will develop the most capable models first. GPT-4 beat competing models because OpenAI had more compute. Google's Gemini caught up because Google built more data centers. The pattern is consistent and, more importantly, exponential. Each generation of more powerful AI enables faster development of the next generation. The company that achieves even a 6-month lead in training capacity often maintains that lead indefinitely because the AI itself helps optimize the infrastructure for further training. SpaceX AI now has a credible path to more training capacity than any competitor on Earth. Not just more than Tesla, more than Google, more than Microsoft, more than the combined AI divisions of every tech giant that relies on Earth-bound infrastructure. Orbital data centers change the equation entirely, and Musk, through this merger, controls that path completely. Tesla's AI projects now face a choice that isn't really a choice. Continue developing on Earth-bound infrastructure with all its constraints, or become customers of SpaceX AI's orbital network, paying for access to infrastructure their own investment helped build, but that they don't control. Here's how Musk can legally squeeze Tesla out and why regulators won't stop him. There's a term for this in economics: vertical foreclosure. It means controlling an essential input and using that control to disadvantage competitors downstream. Think of it like owning the only bridge across a river. You charge competitors extra to cross. Your trucks get free passage. Picture Tesla paying SpaceX for Starlink access, while SpaceX builds its own autonomous vehicles. Imagine Tesla negotiating compute rates with xAI, while xAI develops its own humanoid robots. That's the reality Tesla helping fund infrastructure that will be used to undercut Tesla's own products. Tesla pouring billions into xAI that becomes SpaceX property, then paying market rates for the same services. And all of this is legal. That's the remarkable thing. Because Tesla and SpaceX xAI are separate companies because one is public and the others are private. Musk can claim that arm's-length transactions govern their relationships. He can point to board approvals, to shareholder disclosures. He can say everything has been properly authorized, while systematically advantaging the entities he controls personally over the one he controls only partially through public markets. The stock market has begun to recognize this dynamic. Since the merger announcement, Tesla's share price has declined approximately 12%, while the broader tech sector has risen. Analyst reports that previously focused on Tesla's vehicle delivery numbers have shifted to discussing AI strategy risk and related party exposure. Institutional investors who once championed Musk as a visionary have started asking uncomfortable questions. Pension funds holding Tesla shares for millions of retirees are scrutinizing capital flows between Musk's entities. The narrative is shifting from Musk's genius benefits all his companies to Musk's private companies may benefit at Tesla's expense. But the 3 million retail shareholders who believed the narrative, they're the ones who will bear the cost. They're holding shares in a company that may have already been strategically deprioritized by its own founder. They funded the infrastructure that's now being used to build a competitor they can't invest in directly. Tesla may survive this. It may even thrive if the Orbital AI infrastructure becomes available for purchase at reasonable rates. If the talent drain stops, if Musk decides that maintaining Tesla's valuation serves his larger interests. Those are big ifs. They're not things you can count on. What you can count on is that the SpaceX xAI merger has created a new category of power, the power to train AI without earthbound constraints, to control the infrastructure that future AI systems will depend on, to charge whatever the market will bear or deny access entirely. But this story is bigger than just Tesla. Much bigger. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about Tesla. It isn't even just about Elon Musk. It's about a pattern that's emerging across the entire technology sector. A concentration of power that's happening so quietly that most people haven't noticed the scope of what's being built. The SpaceX XAI merger represents something new: the vertical integration of physical infrastructure for artificial intelligence, not just software, not just data centers, the rockets that build the networks, the satellites that form the networks, the energy systems that power them, all controlled by a single entity, unaccountable to public markets. What Musk has built is vertical integration at a scale that makes the old monopolies look like corner stores. He controls the means of reaching space. He controls the communications infrastructure in space. He controls the computing infrastructure being moved to space, and he's using that control to create capabilities no competitor can match. Not because they're less innovative, but because they don't own the physical infrastructure required to compete. The regulatory framework has no answer for this. The FCC regulates satellite communications, but doesn't consider AI training capacity in its licensing decisions. The FTC reviews mergers but traditionally focuses on consumer prices, rather than competitive access to computational infrastructure. NASA coordinates launch schedules but doesn't evaluate market implications. Each agency sees a piece of the puzzle. None of them see the whole picture. This fragmentation isn't accidental. It's structural. The regulations were written for an era when rockets, communications, and computing were separate industries dominated by separate companies. Nobody anticipated a single entity controlling all three. Nobody wrote rules for what happens when the same person, who launches your satellites, also trains the AI that runs on them and controls the data links between them. The regulatory gaps aren't oversights. They're consequences of technological change outpacing institutional adaptation. Consider how different this is from previous antitrust cases. When the government broke up AT&T in 1984, they were addressing a clearly defined monopoly in telephone service. When they prosecuted Microsoft in the 1990s, the issue was dominance in PC operating systems. But SpaceX AI doesn't fit neatly into any existing regulatory category. It's not just a communication company, not just a launch provider, not just an AI firm. It's a vertically integrated stack that spans all three, and existing laws simply weren't designed to address this kind of convergence. And meanwhile, the concentration accelerates. The merger filing included commitments to invest over $20 billion in orbital computing infrastructure over the next 3 years. That's more than Tesla's entire R&D budget for the same period, being deployed not to solve problems on Earth climate change, poverty, disease, but to build an AI training infrastructure. That's literally above the constraints that limit everyone else. There's a darker interpretation of all this that needs to be considered. Not just that Tesla is being disadvantaged relative to SpaceX XAI, but that Tesla was always intended to be a funding vehicle for the larger project. Look at the timeline. Tesla went public in 2010. Raising capital that Musk used to establish SpaceX's early dominance. Tesla's success, driven by retail investor enthusiasm, by environmental idealism, by the genuine innovation of electric vehicles, created the financial foundation that allowed Musk to pursue rockets, then satellites, then AI. Each step built on the previous one. Each new company used the credibility established by the last, but the direction of resource flow has reversed. Now money moves from public markets into private coffers, from Tesla's balance sheet to XAI's expansion, from infrastructure on Earth that shareholders can evaluate to orbital infrastructure, invisible from the ground. This reversal represents a fundamental break from how public markets are supposed to function. The entire premise of public investment is that shareholders provide capital in exchange for participation in a company's growth. When that capital gets diverted to private entities, instead, entities that shareholders cannot invest in, cannot vote on, cannot even properly evaluate the social contract breaks down. Musk hasn't just found a loophole. He's demonstrated that the entire framework can be gamed. The question isn't whether this is legal. It probably is. Musk is careful about formal compliance, about checking the regulatory boxes, about maintaining the appearance of propriety. The question is whether this is right, whether a system that allows one person to extract billions in public capital, divert it to private ventures, and then use those ventures to make the original public company obsolete. Whether a system that permits, this deserves the trust that investors have placed in it. Tesla's board could challenge this. Institutional investors could demand independent oversight of related party transactions. Regulators could treat the SpaceX XAI merger as the antitrust event it clearly is, rather than the routine corporate reorganization it's been portrayed as. Any of these interventions could change the trajectory. None have happened. None appear likely to happen. The incentives are misaligned, the oversight mechanisms are captured. The narrative is controlled by the person who benefits from its control. Tesla was the first test case. It won't be the last. The SpaceX XAI deal is worth $1.5 trillion on paper. But its real value isn't monetary. It's precedent. Proof of concept. The demonstration that you can build private infrastructure more powerful than any public alternative, fund it with public capital, and face no meaningful consequence. So where does this leave you? 3 things to understand. First, what they actually did. Tesla invested $2 billion in infrastructure. It doesn't control money that could have built a second Dojo supercomputer, a dedicated renewable facility, or a research campus that might have attracted talent instead of losing it. Instead, that capital sits on a private entity's balance sheet available to Musk, but not to the Tesla shareholders who provided it. 400 engineers walked to a competitor sharing the same founder. The architecture is nearly complete. Launch, connectivity, and AI optimizing each other. Second, why this matters beyond Musk. The boundary between public and private isn't a safeguard, it's a channel, a mechanism for moving capital. From dispersed shareholders to concentrated control. From regulated transparency to unregulated opacity. The regulatory framework has no answer for this. The FCC regulates satellite communications, but doesn't consider AI training capacity in its licensing decisions. The FTC reviews mergers but traditionally focuses on consumer prices, rather than competitive access to computational infrastructure. NASA coordinates launch schedules but doesn't evaluate market implications. Each agency sees a piece of the puzzle. None of them see the whole picture. This fragmentation isn't accidental. It's structural. The regulations were written for an era when rockets, communications, and computing were separate industries dominated by separate companies. Nobody anticipated a single entity controlling all 3. Nobody wrote rules for what happens when the same person, who launches your satellites, also trains the AI that runs on them and controls the data links between them. The regulatory gaps aren't oversights. They're consequences of technological change outpacing institutional adaptation. The template is now established. Use public credibility to raise capital, divert it to private ventures, control the outcome absolutely. This isn't just the Musk story. It's how modern capitalism works when left unchecked. Third, where you are in this story. If you hold Tesla shares, you've been funding your own displacement. Every satellite launch, every orbital GPU installation, every engineer who walks out of Austin into a facility you paid for, but don't own it all, moves in one direction. Up, away from the company that started it all. When you read about SpaceX XAI's breakthroughs, will you celebrate as an investor? Or realize too late that your Tesla shares represent a stake in the company that got left behind? The distinction between Musk's success and Tesla's success is no longer theoretical. It's operational reality. There's a cruel irony here. Early adopters typically capture advantages they establish market position, build expertise, create switching costs, but Tesla's early investment didn't create sustainable advantage. It created dependency. The company that moved first became the foundation upon which its competitor was built. The merger is done. The infrastructure builds. The talent has moved. And somewhere in Texas, Tesla's Dojo supercomputer keeps training neural networks for autonomous vehicles that may never achieve full autonomy, not because the technology is impossible, but because the company that was supposed to build it got outpaced by its own sister corporation, funded by its own shareholders, controlled by the same man who promised a different future. The cost, it turns out, was you, and the bill is only beginning to come due. Think about what this means for the future of innovation, when the most important infrastructure is built with public money, but controlled privately, when the benefits flow to a single person, rather than to the society that funded it. We're not just watching a wealth transfer. We're watching the future being privatized, right before our eyes. When SpaceX XAI completes its orbital constellation, 10,000 AI processing nodes will circle above us, trained on our data, powered by sunlight. We can't access, creating capabilities we can't replicate. These orbital systems will process satellite imagery in real time, optimize global logistics instantaneously, model climate patterns with unprecedented accuracy, and the companies that control this infrastructure will decide who gets access and at what price. That's not competitive advantage. That's a permanent structural divide between those who control orbital infrastructure and everyone else. The market hasn't priced this in yet. Tesla still trades as if competing in a fair fight, but when recognition comes, it won't be gradual. It will be sudden. A repricing event wiping out billions. Tesla's obsolescence isn't a bug. It's a feature, the natural outcome of extracting value from public markets into private hands. The window is closing, not because anyone stops us, but because we aren't paying attention. The next time someone promises you that their public company is building the future, look at where their private companies are putting their real resources. Look at which entity they control completely and which one they merely influence. Look at the flow of talent, of capital, of attention. If you want to follow these hidden capital transfers, if you want to understand how the dark side of success really operates, don't leave this channel, because this isn't the only untold story. Because that's where the truth lives, not in press releases, not in product demos, in the quiet movements while the world watches the show, in the architectures being built above the atmosphere, while we're arguing about what happens on the ground. And by the time the average investor realizes what happened, the window for doing anything about it has already closed. Don't let that be you. The future is being decided now. While you watch, while you decide, the playbook has been written, the template tested. The next founder who wants to replicate it is already watching and learning. Imagine a pharmaceutical CEO who uses a public company's resources to fund private drug development, then licenses those drugs back at premium rates. Or a renewable energy founder who builds technology with public capital, then transfers it to a private entity. The Musk model isn't industry-specific, it's a blueprint for extracting value from public markets while avoiding accountability. Because the next merger is coming, and now you know exactly what to look for. The next time someone promises you that their public company is building the future, look at where their private companies are putting their real resources. Look at which entity they control completely, and which one they merely influence. Look at the flow of talent, of capital, of attention. Because in the end, that's where the truth lives. Not in press releases, in the quiet movements while the world watches the show.